I've got one question for you. Is it worth the price of admission to board the hype train for The Division 2? Yes. Yes, it is. Mostly. Hi there, it's me, Widely Style Kyle. I'm back from content creator hell to talk about Tom Clancy's The Division 2. Now, this game just recently came out of its open beta, and we're going to be looking at a full release on Friday, March 15th. Now, if you bought any of the gold or ultimate or super high-speed editions, you'll have early access coming to you on March 12th, so look forward to that. But there's a lot of things to talk about coming out of the beta and going into the full release, so I think this video is primarily for people who may not have played The Division 1, who are possibly looking to get their feet wet, or for those people who may have liked The Division 1 at one point but decided, you know what, I don't want to play this anymore, this isn't for me. Maybe you want to give it another try. And you know what? We're going to explore that together. Now, I'll be up front here, I am very excited for this game, and everything that Massive Entertainment is offering for us up front at launch. On the whole, The Division 2 feels new and exciting, while still keeping with the familiar elements from the first Delta era. Oh, I did miss you. Now, if you're not the kind of player who enjoys open world exploration, scavenging for loot, and grinding for better gear, this game, like the first Division, is unlikely to change your mind. Most of those same core elements are back, but they've been expanded upon significantly. Now, instead of traipsing through the city dump for some bottles of water that you're probably never going to use anyway, you're finding building materials, food, water, and other resources that you can spend on everything from base upgrades to weapon mods. The base building system does feel very linear, but participating in it, you can begin to see the small improvements that go into the smaller settlements around the DC area.
We could probably spare some people. I'll be outside.
This, combined with the smarter enemy and ally AI, helps the city to feel like you're just a small part of it, instead of swooping in to save the Nerf gun shooting JTF from New York.
Hey, Agent. We got a project ready
Seriously,
for completion here.
JTF? WTF. Sorry. That was a bad joke. Don't laugh at that. Now, it won't be long after you start to explore the ruins of DC that you'll run into the fantastic weather effects that this game has to offer. The darkness of night, combined with a heavy rainstorm, serves to create tension in the game. You lose visibility, and so your enemies become just that much more dangerous. There are some times in which you may want to hunker down and wait out the storm if your gear isn't quite up to snuff, but thankfully in the beta there was never a point in which I felt under-geared, despite my desire to aim for gear set bonuses over gear level, which was a nice addition to the early game. Another small but very noticeable change to the weapon system is the overhaul of the weapon mod system. Now, gone are the days of finding dozens upon dozens of weapon mods, picking up and discarding mods until you find the min-maxed rolls for whatever specific weapon mod you're trying to find. Now, instead, you can craft mods with fixed stats, and once you craft one, it stays permanently unlocked. So this feels like when BioWare simplified the gear system coming from Mass Effect into Mass Effect 2. It's different, but overall you get used to it. The main issue with the system is that for every buff you get from a mod, there is an equal but opposite debuff that often led to simply removing the mod after a short period of time. Now, I like what they were trying to do with the mod system. Simplify the system, unclutter your inventory, and force players to make a tactical choice when selecting their mods. But a lot of the mods are just completely unusable when you factor in those debuffs. I'm personally hoping that they'll balance these out for the release, if not shortly thereafter. Now, Massive had also made several changes to scaling and difficulty coming out of the closed beta and into the open beta, and were detailed in a laundry list of changes that indicate that they're taking a lot of the feedback they're receiving and implementing a lot of the changes as they're going along. A lot of the balancing changes were great, the time to kill enemies feels reasonable, and my favorite weapon class in the beta was by far the LMG. Mowing down several NPCs in quick succession was by far the most satisfying gunplay I've experienced in this game. I did miss the level of aggression that enemies displayed in the closed beta. I mean, I was forced to constantly scramble for different cover spots, but according to one of the Division's State of the Game broadcasts, there were apparent scaling issues where enemies would become bullet sponges when playing with a squad, so while I didn't see that issue personally, I was definitely happy to hear that it was being resolved ahead of launch. Now, there was some negative feedback, though. Spend all of a minute searching for it on Reddit or the official forums, and you'll see that there were some pretty heavy issues with sound dropping out of the game almost completely. Now, I was playing on the Xbox One, and it seemed a bit more frequent in the open beta, and seemed to kick in sometimes when using an assault rifle to shoot at an enemy with armor. Now, sometimes the only way to fix it was by a hard reset of the game, which I'm hoping Massive has a plan to fix at launch. Also, I noticed a few more server issues in the open beta than I did in the closed beta, but with just about zero rubber banding and the only occasional frame rate stutter, I would say the issues held together pretty— DAMN IT! Oh, come on! Oh, and by the way, it was nice not to be spammed with the "another agent calling for backup" messages every 4 seconds.
Incoming backup request.
No, shut up! I'm not helping you! Now let's discuss one of the Division's most infamously controversial topics: the Dark Zone. Now, it was pretty abundantly clear that Division 1 suffered from the ongoing attempts by the developers to reconcile the mechanics of PvE with those of PvP, and it was always a constant give and take that Massive, to their credit, put a lot of work into, but were never really able to find a correct balance for. Now, this resulted in the much maligned tactical chicken dance, which is to say PvP in the Division 1 hardly ever involves taking cover or factoring in anything beyond simple gear numbers and properly timed healing. Most changes would impact one or the other in a negative way, which overall hurt the player base. For instance, adding a brief cooldown to a combat roll, or an increase in the time it took to heal, made PvP a little less ridiculous, but it was a debuff that especially hurt PvE players who were faced with some of the game's most punishing content. With all that in mind, looking ahead to the Division 2, it would seem as if a lot of the changes to the overall game mechanics were made primarily with PvP in mind, so they kind of worked backwards into PvE. So, for example, having to take critical seconds out of a firefight to switch out a sappy plate from behind cover, replace the quick insta-heal, or the game forcing a player into a first-person view to use an equipped scope instead of maintaining the third-person aspect. Some of these changes may have had mixed reactions from fans, but once I got used to the changes, I would say I welcomed them. Unbalanced weapon mod system aside, it was clear that Massive wanted to force even greater importance on taking cover, both in PvE and PvP. In my playthrough of the Dark Zone, I was inclined to take cover instead of engaging in the tactical chicken dance, which, as you can see here, would get you chewed up pretty quickly if you tried it. Firefights no longer come down to "drop the heal that last second, lol, get good," but instead gave you the impression that any player can be dangerous if they're just smart about it. Now, despite getting defeated overall in this particular video, I still left the Dark Zone wanting to go back in just for the PvP, and that's a feeling that I never even came close to getting from the Division 1, even after the numerous attempts to get good. A lot of the feedback that we regularly saw on the Division subreddit and on the forums also found its way into the Dark Zone. We now have turrets that will open fire on rogue agents at checkpoints, ensuring that you're not opening a door to your instant death. I also wanted to mention that the Dark Zone now has a perk system, allowing you to choose perks that would support you whichever way you play. Do you just want to farm the Dark Zone? You can take a perk that would bring the extraction chopper to you that much faster. It's an innovative way to really expand on that Dark Zone system, and it really makes it feel like a much more fleshed out game mode, as opposed to just something that was just added to the game. So let's discuss the endgame content. If you played through the entirety of the Division 1, you'll remember that, at launch, the endgame consisted of a wide variety of content to include the Dark Zone, and that's it. Now, a few weeks later, the first incursion, Falcon Lost, was released, and 4 new gear sets came along with it. This would have been okay, except Falcon Lost was boring, broken, and very easily exploitable at launch. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of players who were now in a position where they could either cheat the broken game mechanics for the best gear to stand a chance against the trolls in the Dark Zone, or the players who would play the game legit and enjoy the sight of the loading screen as they are put down by trolls in the Dark Zone. Again, that was the end game. Now, the game would stay in a relatively broken state for quite some time, and it took Massive a ton of balancing, rebalancing, and more balancing before The Division was in a place where most of the fans who stuck it out with them would say it needed to be. But in The Division 2, they've already front-loaded a ton of information regarding endgame content, which carries over a lot of the content and concepts that were developed perhaps too little too late for the first Division. So that takes us to the point of this video. Is now a good time to jump in, or even return to The Division? So the simple answer to that question is, it depends. And I realize that's a non-answer, but trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. So, right now, the biggest issues that I saw coming out of the beta were the servers and the sound. The first one being the servers, that'll get fixed. That's the whole purpose of a beta, it's to stress test the servers. Hopefully, they've got the information that they need, and they'll be able to rectify that pretty quickly. Even though, let's be honest, the servers were in a much better place with this beta than they were in the Division 1. Now, the sound issues are an issue that Massive cannot afford to ignore. That is a game-breaking issue, because if you can't hear the footsteps and the bullets coming at you, you're going to be playing an unplayable game. It's not something that Massive can afford to look away from. So, rest assured, they're going to have a fix for that in the near future. And while the beta was balanced for the most part, Massive still has a lot of work to do on the weapon mod system, and time will tell if their announced gear set items will be a fun addition, or if they'll break the game much like they did in the Division 1. Now, I would make the argument that Massive has learned a lot of their missteps from the Division 1, and the current state of that game is a pretty solid reflection of that argument. It took months of damage control on the part of Massive to reel in a community that, at its worst, was growing very bitter and very toxic by the day as a result of that initial inaction and unwillingness to accept community feedback. But I would argue that their new strategy of developing endgame content and seemingly working backwards, ensuring that every player has at least something rewarding to do at the endgame, shows that Massive has overall matured as a studio. And if you agree with that statement, now would be a great time to invest in the game. If you're still feeling buyer's remorse after the rough first year, then maybe it's in your best interest to wait on it a while. Well, that's it then. Delta Error, take me away. Oh, and like and subscribe!